I'm Nikos Panagiotou, President of DCN Global. 2024 is a pivotal year. Half of the population of Earth is voting. They are deciding the day after tomorrow regarding their countries, the region, and the world. DCN Global is at the forefront, producing a series of webinars, a dedicated Telegram channel, a Substack newsletter, in order to present, explain, and analyzing what is happening all across the globe. But most importantly, we are opening up our channels for you to contribute. Follow us, but also contribute by sending us your thoughts on what the rest of the world should know that is happening in your country, in your region. Because 2024, we need actually to make it stand out.
Hello everyone, my name is Diana Filimon and I'm part of the DCN Global team and very happy to be a host on our second episode of discussions about the elections around the world. So if the previous episode in February was focused around the influence of AI on elections, in this one we will talk about the trust in media. Is the decreasing or increasing level of trust in media affecting people who can vote this year or not? And what will grow in this empty place that's left by media, the traditional media, let's say. We will start by going to Sorana, my colleague from Gen Z, our youth media project launched less than 2 months ago on Instagram. And she will tell us what elections we had until now recently and what should we look up for.
Every month, many big or small nations are organizing elections in this historical year for democracy. More people than ever are expected to choose their leaders in 2024. Hi, I'm Sorana Horshia. I'm the editor of Gen Z, a Gen Z media in Eastern Europe. Also, every month you can find me discussing the latest technology trends in elections in our special newsletter. This past month, we've seen elections in democratic countries, as well as in the most authoritarian ones. But let's start with the good news. In March, elections went smoothly in Senegal, and the opposition candidate won. It was a tense time, however. The election got delayed, causing big protests. The government even cut off communication during the demonstrations. But democracy won in the end. South Korea just held general elections on April 10. The opposition won most seats in what was considered a sort of referendum on the president Yoon Suk-yeol. South Korea took fake news and disinformation really seriously. It even developed a tool used by police to spot manipulated and AI-generated videos and images. Moving further to Portugal, where all eyes were on the far-right party Chega. The party used TikTok and Instagram to its advantage and managed to reach a lot of young voters. The elections, however, did not result in a clear majority. Slovakia strengthened its nationalist stance. The left-wing nationalist candidate Peter Pellegrini won in the second round of presidential elections on April 6. Even though the president doesn't have much power, he's making Robert Fico's government stronger. He's against the EU and currently trying to control public media. Moving forward to more authoritarian countries. Russia and Iran's elections went pretty much how everyone expected. Vladimir Putin will soon be the longest-serving leader of the country since 1721. But there were doubts about how fair the elections were. They lasted 3 days and even had electronic voting, which did not guarantee the safety of voters' personal information and was impossible to track by external observers. In Iran, hardly any reformist voices got into parliament. Only about 40% of people voted, the lowest since the 1979 revolution. By the end of this month, we will see the beginning of the biggest elections in the world, the Indian general elections. People will also vote in smaller nations like North Macedonia, the Maldives, or Togo. And if there is one thing they all have in common, it is digitalization and dealing with the good and bad that comes with it. If you are here, you are probably well aware of that. So don't forget to also subscribe to our monthly newsletter discussing technology and disinformation and past and future elections. Also sign up to our Telegram channel where we'll regularly send you insightful readings about these topics.
Hi Hi, Sarah. We want to start this discussion with you about the elections because we are covering this crazy year in democracy around the world. And in Europe, in these last weeks, we had some very interesting events regarding the freedom of expression of people who went out to vote. And Sarah here is our correspondent for Gen Z, for the project that covers Eastern and Central Europe. And we invited her today to talk to us about how did the Slovakia elections go. We've seen a lot of alarming articles about that, but we want you to tell us especially how did you feel it in the online space? How was the process of presenting the candidates, presenting in the media, or how you felt it as a young person? And also, how did the young people react to these elections? Did they went out to vote? If you know some numbers about this, and just how was it this process for young people in Slovakia?
So first, thank you for having me. Second, to answer your question, I think a lot of young people went to cast their votes this presidential election, and that's because we've seen a big difference between the presented candidates in the second round of the elections. So we had a pro-Western retired diplomat, Korchok, and then on the other side, he was before, until his victory, the Speaker of the Parliament, Peter Pellegrini. So basically a part of the coalition. And since the parliamentary elections last year, already the society in Slovakia is pretty divided between the coalition and opposition. It wasn't different this presidential elections. I have no certain numbers, but I know a lot of people, well, being a student, we also talk about this. We also discuss it at school, and I know that most of the young people were seeking the change they want to see in Ivan Korčok, who would pose a sort of an opposition towards the current coalition.
Do you feel like the voice of the young people has been made present in these elections? How do you think they would go out of this disappointed or more excited about making their voices heard?
Well, I believe that people are disappointed, especially young people are disappointed, because that's the difference between the young and older generations. The young preferred Ivan Korčok, and the older ones preferred Pellegrini, which spiked many arguments even in between family members. But I think that Ivan Korčok got more into the minds of young people, and maybe because of this, people will seek the change even in other people rather than the primary representatives like the president or the government. And I know that also many people stated that they want to move from the country, which if they have the resources to, they will. But I believe that many young people aged from 18 to 20 usually don't have the option to just move. So I am honestly also very, I would say even excited to see how this will play out later on, and how the government will cooperate with the president, or rather the president cooperates with the government.
And one last question. We talk a lot about this year about the influence of social media, AI, and all these new technologies in the elections around the world. So how much do you feel that the social media was used in this campaign in Slovakia? Do you have there been any, I don't know, interesting campaigns on TikTok or on Instagram, or were they more traditional, let's say, in their communication?
I believe that both of the candidates used social media. I would say that Kotchuk used them much more, creating very funny videos, even of his own mistakes, or, just generally when he was speaking and made a mistake. So I believe he used this very well to become more close to the younger generation. The other candidate, Pellegrini, also used social media, not as much, I would say, but it was pretty effective, and I know that young people do follow usually both of the candidates for a longer period of time. And there has been, for example, one thing that happened that Pellegrini mentioned on his social media, that apparently his campaign and his voters had been affected by a deepfake video where he's talking about some bank and investment. And many people believe this to be true, but his voters anyway, just supported him and were writing many nice comments under the video, even though it was a deep fake, and he said it himself that it was a deep fake. And also there was one candidate from the first round that was threatening Pellegrini to release multiple videos that could ruin his candidacy. But these videos were never released, I believe, and many believe that they never even existed.
Very interesting. Thank you so much, Sarah, and we'll continue our discussions. So we are here today with let me start again. In my mind, I was fixed that we have 4 speakers, so I'll probably say 4 several times. So we are here today with 3 guests, very important, and we just try to put us on the map, and we cover pretty much an important part of the globe right now. And I will start with our long-time friend Aaron Schrockman, Vice President of Sales and Strategic Partnerships at the Poynter Institute, Executive Director and at PolitiFact, based in Florida right now in the United States. And then we move on into Barcelona with Priti Nalu, Executive Director at the Report for the World, and to Antonio Goix, author, columnist, and co-founder at Jeduca, Association of Education of Journalists, and in Brazil, and based now in Sao Paulo. And this time we will talk about of course, elections, but from a different perspective. And if last time we talked a lot about how AI is changing and influencing elections around the world, and we really had a lot to dig in. This time we focus on trust in media, and you would say, what does this have to do with the elections? Well, I think it kind of has. We see a lot of reports from very prestigious institutions around the world talking about how the trust in media decreasing leaves a very big spot for populists to grow on social media networks, especially where you cannot control them so well, and that could give rise to some very interesting political characters around the world. But our focus is not on political characters. Our focus is on how the people will react this year when they have the choice to make their voice heard in elections. And I will start with Aaron, and it's a very simple question, but with a probably complicated answer, like, what are we getting into this year? And is media prepared to cover such an important year, which can really reshape the world? I'm pretty sure that by this time next year, and we will get back to that, we will be in a different world. What do you think? Are we ready for this? Is media ready for this, Aaron?
Yeah, it's a great question, Diana. Thank you for having me on to talk about this. 2024, nearly half of the world's population will cast votes over the course of the year, or have already, in national elections, and that creates that's an anomaly. That is not normal. That is not typical. But for whatever reason, this year there is just great movement towards a lot of people in a lot of different places deciding who will lead and help shape the policies of our collective futures. Um, I don't want to be too pessimistic. I don't, but I would start from the position that I don't think media is any more ready than it has been at any other time in our history at covering an election. Um, the media industry is and has been always short on resources, short on time, short on the number of people doing the work, and in doing and by that they're always a little behind much more organized actors, whether that's politicians or political parties or people seeking to deceive us or technology companies. If you had to list the people who were prepared for this election and you were ranking them from the most prepared to some of the least prepared, I think the media would certainly rank in the lower half. And I think that is a trouble point for us. It's something that I think we need to think about. I mean, the reality is today there are a lot of forces that could shape how people vote when they go to the ballot box. And I don't think the media is properly necessarily prepared to combat that. So, whether it is, as you talked about on your last episode, the rise of AI and how that will affect elections, I don't think we have a good plan for that to cover as members of the media. I don't think we've learned the lessons of the world elections over the past 4 to 8 years, and I don't think we've grown a lot. I don't think we've changed how we do things fundamentally. Um, Now, the positive spin would be journalists are prepared and have covered elections for hundreds of years, and they will be able to effectively cover an election. So they'll be able to tell you who won. They'll be able to tell you how people performed versus their expectations. They will document the policies and positions that candidates hold. Um, they're okay at that. They'll do a good job at that. I think that is a in most free societies where journalists can operate largely freely. I think we will continue to do those stories well. But I do think there is a concern about how technology can influence this election in particular, and are journalists prepared to combat that? I think we are by nature somewhat reactionary, and we don't have, because of the lack of resources, the time or the ability to kind of proactively prepare for a lot of these potential worst case scenarios, right? So I think, overall, I would say we media is no more or less prepared than it has been. But I think generally it remains underprepared to cover elections because we have limited resources and have been really stressed to cover so much going on in this world. Last point I would make is, of course, we have these very important elections happening all over the world in some of the biggest democracies in the country, in the world, plus other countries. So Russia is holding elections and things like that. But we also have, major other news events happening at the same time. So the war in Ukraine, the fighting in Gaza, the terror attacks that happened in Israel, and so journalists are being pushed and pulled in a lot of different directions to cover different stories, and all that means is they are spending less time preparing or thinking about how they might cover the election and what might happen, whether it's misinformers or AI or deep fakes, or it's ballot fraud or voting fraud, or it's riots or whatever. And I think I personally remain a little worried about how we will cover elections. For me, obviously, being an American citizen living in the United States, working for PolitiFact, I think in particular, the American media is no more prepared to cover the election in 2024 in November than it was in 2020, where you saw what happened on January 6th. So a lot of work for us yet to do. Maybe we'll put it together, but I'm not particularly hopeful.
Thank you so much. As a Romanian activist, I have to mention a very wise, let's say, saying of a politician of ours a few years ago when the snow came in winter, and because the whole country was blocked, their argument for explaining why they were blocked, they said that it caught us by surprise. And we were like, yeah, it's in the calendar. Winter is literally in the calendar every year, and it caught you by surprise. So it feels like you're saying the same thing about the media, that they did not see this election year coming. But yeah, we deal with what we can.
I think it's a great point, Diana. And I would say that after the 2020 election in the United States, I think a lot of journalists sat down and said, how can we do this better? And they had that conversation and had that first set of ideas, but we never continued those conversations. And I think that's something that happens a lot in journalism. You immediately think, how can we do this better? But you don't make the time to actually make it better. And then if you do make the time, there's still resources that you may not have access to because you might not have the funding or the technology expertise to do it. So I think some of the problems are internal to us. Some of the problems are external in essentially how journalism is funded in a lot of places, but completely right.
To Preeti, and I know that the Ground Truth Project is an important part of your work, and that its main focus is to prepare journalists, correspondents from around the world. And and I think that Aaron just lifted the ball for us in this, because he mentioned there are so many different things happening at the same time around the world, and for journalists, especially for correspondents of all kinds, it's very hard to cover everything. And I would like to ask you, like, how do you feel like the world is safe for correspondents? Is it safer or less safe than the years previous to this complicated year? And also, as we said, it's an election year all over the world, and we have a lot of not so much democracies where this election happens, so it makes it even more complicated for journalists. How do you feel the world is for them?
Sure. Thank you, Diana, firstly, for inviting me to this episode. And so it would perhaps be useful to widen the lens a bit on the program and what we try to achieve at Report for the World, which is part of the Ground Truth Project. So what we're trying to do is really bring in more comprehensive coverage of critical issues that are grappling the world, so that people may get local contextual information in their communities and in their countries and across continents. And so we're present in 28 countries, where we're working with 49 public interest media, and we're supporting 65 or 66 specialized journalists that are covering a host of issues from climate change to corruption, governance, health, education, all of the key issues around any elections, right? And so we feel that these local media are the perfect antidote to global crises, and they often provide actionable solutions to seemingly insurmountable problems. And this year, as you mentioned, where there's so many countries in the world going to vote at national, regional, and municipal levels, their role is even more essential. And I'd be happy to go into the different contexts of the countries in which we are supporting journalists, especially those going to those that are conducting elections this year. They have a key similarity. That is the role of social media and non-traditional forms of media in shaping public opinion around the elections in their countries, and both the challenges and the opportunities that our digital native media face as they're trying to provide their audiences with context-specific information about these key election platforms. So maybe we could start with India, where we're supporting some of the leading investigative and in-depth public interest newsrooms. So in India, we are certainly looking at an overdependence on social media. There was a very provocative paper at a tech conference recently that was titled Weaponizing Data for Politics. And this presentation looked at how the Modi government is analyzing public and not so public data, and how they're using this to profile voters and really deliver their targeted messages to them through mobile phones. And so the mobile phone is really where India's elections are being fought, because Facebook is the most used social platform in the country, followed by YouTube and Instagram. And all of this content is, of course, available on these mobile phones. And a vast majority of India's population has access to the internet via these mobile phones. We're talking about over 1 billion users. And so while this is overall a democratizing element, there's also plenty of evidence that political parties are orchestrating online campaigns, especially the party in power, through social media, through actually a social media cell that they've put together. And this includes intimidation of perceived government critics, spreading Islamophobic and misogynistic propaganda, and a host of other acts that should really be criminalized, right? So our reporters in India are playing a crucial role in relaying accurate information in this very important period. India is about to go to polls in May, and it's 800,000, or rather over 1 million, I believe, polling booths across the country, and it is one of the largest voting exercises in the world. It takes about 6 weeks to complete. And so nuanced reporting on key issues is a lifeline for a lot of the communities. For example, our reporters at the News Minute, which is a women-led media outlet that is covering the southern states of the United States, they're working on gender, caste and minorities, and civil liberties as their beats. These are the beats that we're supporting, and there are journalists that are specialized in these areas. Now, these journalists have unique access to some of the most marginalized communities, yet those that are really the backbone of the country. And on another level, what the media are doing, independent media in particular, they have a much more collaborative spirit. So they are facing quite an uphill battle amid this cacophony that is created by disinformation, propaganda campaigns, silencing of the press that is critical of the government. But as part of the solution, they're collaborating to provide accurate reporting on the parliamentary elections and state elections, from creating fact-checking hubs to regional community-focused beats, and to collectively producing real-time results of the polls in such a complex voting exercise. And so we're facing quite a similar situation in our other countries, such as South Africa, Nigeria, also the United States, where our sister program, Report for America, has successfully placed, I believe, over 500 reporters in all of the states. One thing that is similar in all of these landscapes is the history of deep racial, social divides, right? And so our public interest media are trying to put a comprehensive lens and to be able to cover the elections well beyond the polls themselves. We're looking at the next 5-year term, or however long the period is in each country, to really create accountability around the platforms and promises that these winners are making at the moment, and how they're implementing the policies, the nature of the policies, and of course, lack of transparency or corruption issues. Happy to go into our other countries of coverage in the next round.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Very interesting, and we can talk about this for hours, I think. But now we move on to Antonio, and he works a lot for preparing journalists. And my question to him is, do you think they are prepared? What advices would you give also to young journalists, and not just young, but journalists maybe face for the first time this year so many elections and so many overwhelming events? What do you think? What advices do you think you would give, and if you think they are more prepared for this year than they were before?
Well, unfortunately, I have to agree more with Adam with this idea, this argument that we are not prepared. And because of many things he already said, it's not only that it's not because we don't want, but you see in many traditional media institutions that people they don't have time, they don't have the resources, and we are talking about something that's changing a lot. I mean, you can prepare. For instance, I was president and founder from one of an association of education reporters, and we were very worried about how to prepare education reporters to this new ambience of polarization. And 4 years ago, 5 years ago, we were discussing about fake news, and let's make fact checking, and let's make. Now we are in a different discussion. I mean, fake news is still a problem, but now we are dealing with artificial intelligence. And honestly, based on what I'm reading in Brazil, we don't know what is coming. We will have election in October. There will be municipal elections, not national elections. But honestly, I don't think journalists know what they are coming, and maybe and also the Justice Department and many other players, relevant players. So it's quite the only thing that I would say is that it's important to be to have this training, but not a training that we will have in 6 months or in 1 month, and then we were prepared for the next year. It's something that we have always. We have to put on our agenda this necessity of going constantly being prepared for something that we don't know. And that's, I mean, I wish I could give you a more positive view, optimistic view that we could be prepared for this, but we're not. And one of the things that part in Brazil particularly, and I know that other countries also this it happens the same, is that no matter how our stories, our articles, they can be accurate, they can be well writing, or well whatever is the media that we are working. But what is happening in Brazil, and this is something it's quite new, is that there is hyper partisan medias that people in Brazil, Bolsonaro supporters or Lula supporters, they are not watching the same media. Bolsonaro supporters are watching social media and some traditional media, just like in the US, they have Fox News. So they have a kind of hyper partisan news, and it's not only about fake news, and sometimes it's not about fake news. It's about a very biased way of presenting news to the audience. And something that's quite challenging for us is that if you are not watching the same, you are not watching the same facts, it's hard to have a dialogue. And democracy depends on dialogue, of people who think have different point of views. But people are getting informed by totally different the media diet of people of Bolsonaro supporters and Lula supporters in Brazil. They are completely different. So, as a journalist, something that I ask myself, but I don't have an answer, is how do you go against these bubbles? How do you not only you have to write well, you have to communicate well, you have to prepare well your story. This is something that we always had to do, but now we have also look how my argument will reach and be accepted by someone who is not reading the newspaper where I work. And this is something that, unfortunately, I don't have the answer. The most that I can put here for debate is that saying that this is a problem that we should be aware of.
Thank you so much. And I would like to start the conversation, let's say, with all of us. And my starting point in this conversation is that I don't know if you've read the new project that Financial Times released a few weeks ago, and it's about the news for the next generation, let's say. And they talk to a lot of young people across the world. And it surprised me to see that one young person they talked to said that she trusts more a witness than a journalist when something happens. And this was a big discussion also with the young journalists I coordinate, and they were asking, like, okay, what's happening? The role of the journalist is fading away. Are we just gonna consume more subjective content and not so much objective content? So it all ties into so many little things that cause big damage in media. And I come back also to predict this, and focusing on how local journalists, people based in small communities, how important they are, and the fact that they are disappearing in some parts of the world is affecting hugely the quality of journalism. So, long story short, is media really losing trust among people? And if so, do you think it's irreversible? And is there anything we can do to stop it? So please feel any of you can jump in and say their opinion.
Diana, to your point, Diana, about how the non-traditional outlets are sort of gaining ground. So if we were to sort of step aside from the definition for a second and say, instead of looking at journalism as one, sort of narrow type of information channel or ecosystem, if we looked at good content, verified content or information, then we're actually seeing a lot more collaboration now, especially at least in the global south, between these content creators and the traditional journalism outlets and civil society movements or organizations on the ground in terms of community engagement. So we are seeing a lot of also youth-led community engagement where journalism outlets are, working with new generations of experts as well on climate or corruption or AI or whatever else. As an example, we have our reporters at Sowetan in South Africa, which is also going to elections hold its national elections, parliamentary elections in May. They are looking at a host of topics through a social justice lens, while serving communities that are away from the traditional urban centers, where a lot of the journalism outlets are traditionally situated. And so when they're covering social justice issues, they're often connected to grassroots initiatives, including youth-led movements. And so they're starting to, or continuing to, because they have this record of being the paper during the anti-apartheid movement. So they continue to play a crucial role in building awareness around the different election issues and fighting divisive propaganda. So we are seeing some positive, a lot of positive collaboration happening. But the fact of the matter is, I think it was an Article 19 report that said 80% of the world is experiencing decreased freedom of expression compared to a decade ago. So we are faced with an uphill battle, and there's no doubt about that. I agree with my colleagues. But the wonderful and also the complicated thing about journalists is that we're accustomed to chaos and things not working, and that is our usual mode of operating. So I suppose a lot of our outlets know that the governments that will come into power are not going to be the ones that are best placed to carry out those functions. And so we're really looking at the next long term and with a view of creating accountability around governments and the corporations that they're often colluding with.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in and say, I mean, certainly, the issue of how the public sees media and how the public trusts media is a important one. And I would add that I think media can do a much better job at returning to its core and fundamental mission, which is to serve the public. And so, somewhere along the way, whether on purpose, by accident, there was a split where people began to think that the media wasn't serving the interests of the public. They were serving their own interests or the interests of the powerful or whoever they were politically aligned to, I suppose. And I think journalists can really should really think about how they can go back to helping viewers, voters, readers, listeners to help them understand and answer questions. There was an interesting story in a Harvard publication that looked at the New York Times and its staff, and it found that something like I don't want to get the numbers wrong, but that the most represented group of journalists at the New York Times went to Ivy League schools. So Harvard, Princeton, Yale. And it's a perfect example about how we kind of lost our way because America is not an Ivy League place, right? Most 95% of Americans did not go to an Ivy League school, yet why is our foremost newspaper overly represented by Ivy League graduates? And by doing that, just even that little thing, we create this belief that the media isn't like us, the people. And I think we need to really be thoughtful about how we can kind of build that back. The one other thing that I would say, though, is there are lots of people and organizations that are actively working to create dissent and create distrust. So it is not enough for the media to say, we will try to be more trustworthy and you can trust us more. We also need to get at the societal influences that are trying to take apart our trust in all public institutions, not just media, but all public institutions. So it's a complicated problem, but I think the media can do more to become more trustworthy by trying to reflect the communities it serves and remember that its primary job is to serve its community.
Excellent points. Thank you so much. Antonio.
Yes, I will jump here, putting something more, an argument, more of long-term arguments. Not, it's not an answer for tomorrow, for today, for this year, but I will add the importance that we collaborate with education systems to really incorporate media literacy in the curriculum, in the teachers' practices, in schools, and not the way. I mean, in Brazil, this is I know that in United States you have a long tradition about media literacy. In Brazil, this is quite new, and usually we get in Brazil the idea of media literacy on how not to be fooled by the big media, by the big companies that control the information. Nowadays, I would say that media literacy is highly connected. It was always, in some degree, was connected, but now it's highly connected with civic education. And the public space where people are still having contact with diversity are schools, are public schools. So I think as journalists and media companies, they of course, if you add something more on the role of companies that are lacking of resources, this is, I know that how difficult it is, but I will put a lot of emphasis of thinking in the long term and how do you create an environment that allow teachers to be prepared to discuss media literacy, not only big news media, social media, and connected with civic education. We have, as I said in my first time that I mentioned here, that we have a problem of a dialogue. We are not people who think different. They are not open to dialogue. You see, for instance, just to give an example, in Brazil, it's very common that two congressmen they have a discussion at the parliament, and they are not worried about the dialogue. Each one they want 30 seconds of one or something to put on social media, and supporters of one side will see 30 seconds of the debate, the fake debate, and the supporters of the other congressmen will see another completely different short view of this debate. They are not interested in dialogue. The dialogue has lost importance it's losing importance. So I think media literacy and civic education it's two ways that we need to address this problem now. Although this is not a shortcoming, it's not something that we will solve for tomorrow, for this year, but something that we really have to discuss more with journalists also, not only with educators, but journalists should be more engaged, in my opinion, on this issue.
Antonio, that's an
Thank you so much,
excellent topic.
Excellent points, and yeah, I think we can make a plan for the next 4 or 5 years to prevent future disasters around the world in elections especially. And here I would like to add a point. For example, in Romania, many of the extremist politicians, or let's say populists to be more nicer to them, are not very present on televisions, on mainstream, let's say, media, but they have a very good social media presence. And they, the last time they got a very good percentage in the elections, especially because nobody saw them coming, because they were not where you would usually look for politicians or for candidates on TV or on written press, but they were on TikTok or on Instagram and on I don't know what other Facebook platforms, and they caught everyone by surprise. And I think they will probably do the same again. So is mainstream media, and the fact that it's not so trusted anymore, is it leaving an empty chair for populists to grow, or is it unable to adapt to these so many channels where you can get your information, or you can get your favorite candidate from, or is just business as usual and it's nothing bad in it, or these two are not connected? Do you see a connection between these things, and if so, what can we do, or how can we defend ourselves against it?
I just wanted to add what Antonio said about the importance of media literacy, and totally agree that across the board in all countries, media could be doing more, both in collaborating with educators, but on their own, really providing more reliable information around these, or debunking false information for the most vulnerable communities. So my job really is to look at some of the most successful cases where these type of work is happening, and how to scale them and integrate them into the newsroom's DNA or editorial makeup. So one positive case that we have, one of the many positive cases that we have, is our partner Daily Maverick in South Africa started an education beat through our support, and they play a critical role in exactly this type of education. But unfortunately, what happens with a lot of these smaller media or specialized media is the beats that they would like to sort of make permanent in their newsrooms are not necessarily the ones that are most supported by audiences, by subscribers, or even by foundations. So some of the gaps that we see is owing to this. But there are other positive examples where there's another different approach to, let's say, media literacy or education. In Brazil, we have a hyperlocal media outlet called Agência Mural that is really fostering the first generations of reporters in a specific neighborhood of Sao Paulo that has been marginalized for decades. So in this case, the education comes from these reporters that are covering democracy, disinformation, governance issues, and they publish some of their work through WhatsApp podcasts. So the youth in the households receive these directly, and then they disseminate the information through the families. So you're doing a community level re-education or awareness around some of the key issues. And these will be super important for this community as they're going to vote in the upcoming municipal elections this year. So there are positive cases, but it's not being systematically, media literacy as a service is not something that is being systematically delivered across the board. And this is definitely where what you talked about, Diana, in terms of populist messaging, those who are most popular on social media or have a lot of traction are winning over these media outlets that actually have verified accurate information.
So much. Aaron, would you chip in?
You have no audio. Aaron.
Yeah, we don't hear you.
I'm sorry. So Diana,
Perfect.
to your question, I do think media does struggle with when to cover and how to cover what we might have typically or historically called fringe candidates. And I think this is actually a really good discussion. I mean, in some ways, we have to acknowledge if the media covers and writes about candidates who who are not necessarily typical, we're essentially raising their profile. We're doing their work for them. And I do so as the example you put in Romania of candidates having very active social media, I would ask journalists, of course, to monitor that very carefully and be thinking about when and how I should tell stories about that candidate. But one of the things I would definitely be doing is looking to see, no matter how active they are, I'd be looking to see how active their community is in supporting them. Because we don't want to be in the position where we're writing stories about a candidate and effectively giving them free advertising and promoting their campaign or candidate. So that would be the first thing I would say. I think the second thing I would say is that, journalists who have been doing this for a long period of time are get used to institutional norms. They think things work the way a lot of the government bureaucracy kind of works, and so that therefore we are often caught off guard, and we have to figure out a way to better prepare for that. And I think, again, it's through audience listening to our communities. I mean, I don't know if a survey has ever been done on this, but I am fairly certain that most members of the media thought Hillary Clinton would win the election for president in 2016, not Donald Trump, right? And the fact that media was caught flat-footed in that election, and there are plenty of other examples around the world, speaks to sometimes we kind of do the activities of coverage and reporting that is really based in the halls of power. We talk to business elites, we talk to government elites, and what we need to be doing is figuring out ways to speak to average, typical voters way more, to better understand what they're feeling and how they're feeling it, because I think that'll make us that'll build trust, but it'll better prepare us for what might be coming, and allows us to tell those stories in a way that I think could be helpful to our audiences.
Let me jump here. I don't know if you're still listening to me, but my connection is not good. But if you are, I will continue. I will just in favor of journalists. I will remind you of an anecdote. To me, I am married with a political scientist. And in 2018, when Bolsonaro was elected, I remember that we are political scientists, and they were all asking me, why did you not prepare? Why did you not perceive that Bolsonaro could win the election. And I had no answer, of course. But then I come back to them and I said, "And did you have the answer? Did you? Were you prepared?" So it's not only about, of course, it's not only about media. It's something that, of course, journalists has a big role. But the election of Trump in the United States, in Bolsonaro in Brazil, in many others, was we are not prepared because we are analyzing data with old ideas. For instance, now we used to say that economy is the most important, and economy will prevail when you predict an election. Right now, we're not sure about that. We're not sure about that in the United States. We're sure about that in Brazil, because they are very different phenomena. And I will add, for finishing here, that we also have a bigger discussion about regulation of media. I don't know if you are aware or how much this news is it's circulating outside Brazil, but now we have a Twitter, the billionaire Elon Musk, the owner of Twitter, is using his account on Twitter to make. He's criticizing the Supreme Court in Brazil, who has been fighting, have made some decisions that were against Bolsonaro supporters. And Elon Musk, it's like repeating exactly the same arguments of Bolsonaro supporters. So we have a billionaire based on United States with a lot of power, a power that we don't know because he controls algorithms. So if this is, of course, we are discussing here as journalists, but I will add only that reminder that this is a discussion that's much bigger than it's not only a media issue. It's something that we really have to pay attention as society for the power of this social media, and how someone based in another country. So we see this with Russian Telegram, with Chinese TikTok. This is something that's it's much bigger than us, and we should pay attention also for these discussions about regulation of social media.
Thank you so much, Antonio. And now I'd like to bring Aaron to make something that's very hard to make right now. A wild guess where we will be in 1 year with the elections and the media and all the craziness around the world. So if you could have, I don't know, a crystal ball, what would you see in it in 1 year from now? And we will check back with you in 1 year.
Please don't, Diana. I think I'm very bad at making predictions. So I think in some ways, like, my advice would be whatever I say here, the opposite will probably happen. So that's probably my ultimate prediction. I mean, look, I think that it's really interesting. I think it is really interesting to see how the world community is staying together or coming together in the next year. I will start with a scary piece that is not my prediction, but that is someone else's prediction. I was recently at an event with a longtime Pentagon correspondent for the New York Times, who has covered basically every war that has happened in the last 3 decades. And he left his audience with this thought, which I thought was haunting. But then I thought, he might be onto something, and this is scary. But he literally said, 18 months from now, there's a scenario in which we look back at 18 months from now, World War III has started. And there's a scenario in which we look back and we say, this was the moment when things started to develop and we didn't notice it. The reality here is the world situation is very tense. It's tense in the Middle East. It remains tense in Ukraine. We don't know. There's lots of things we don't know. We don't know what Putin's next move and what he will do and how that will affect Europe and NATO and the U.S. In the United States, Donald Trump has essentially said he has suggested he will leave NATO, or certainly not participated in the way that the U.S. has traditionally participated in it. And you have the other kind of just worldwide tension that I think is boiling and should be worrisome to all of us. And so one of the things I would say is not a prediction, but a recommendation is to journalists, as they tell stories about their communities and the people that they are serving, their readers, I would ask them, and I'd hope that they could also kind of take a view out, kind of widen their perspective and widen their view to think about how things fit in the global context. So not be so parochial about what they write and how they write, because I think there is a lot that's interconnected that maybe gets lost. Certainly does here in the U.S., where I think we tend to focus on what's happening within our borders, and that's about it. I think so. That would be a recommendation, not a prediction. And I'm not predicting World War III, by the way. I'm not, but I'm saying that smart people are thinking that's where we're at right now. We need to be prepared or thinking or I don't know, but just mindful of that. My prediction would be, if I had to make one prediction, I would say that, I think though countries and their citizens and their voters are very, very different, I have noticed, and I do think that there's a lot of commonality about how the world moves, like ebbs and flows politically. And so I do think looking at the results in the elections, whether it's in the EU or other places around the world, I think will portend what happens in other countries around the world. So, I think if you have populist, more nationalistic kind of outcomes in a wide swath of elections, I think that would portend well for other nationalist, populist candidates around the globe, and vice versa. If you have kind of more cooperative, kind of a coalition building kind of governments forming around the world, I think that movement will kind of like snowball a little bit. So I mean, I am a believer that we're kind of more interconnected than we actually think and give ourselves credit for. And so I would that would be a prediction, that you can start to look at elections as they happen around the world and for instance, think how they might relate to the election in the United States, where I am. For the media, I think my prediction would be, we are going to try very hard to tell the important stories. We will work feverishly to do so. We won't get a lot of sleep. We will won't have a lot of resources to do it, and we might not get everything we want done. But I do think what I'm always amazed by wherever I visit and wherever I talk to a journalist is how committed they are, and how dedicated they are to telling stories truthfully and accurately. So, my message of hope there is that I do think you have, tens of thousands of people around this world who are committed to telling stories of truth, and will work tirelessly to do that throughout the year, no matter what happens, no matter who's elected. And, I do think that is a good thing for us. So I guess if you're listening and you have lots of money, give to your local newspaper or television station, or support projects like some of the ones that were mentioned during this discussion and others, because I do think the work is noble, it's necessary, and it does produce lasting impact for communities. So I don't know if that was a prediction, but that was my thoughts. How does that sound?
You started very pessimistic and scary, and you ended up in a good tone. So maybe the advice would be to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And on this note, thank you so much, Priti, Aaron, Antonio. Thank you so much for your contributions in our episode. And yeah, we will definitely have to get back together in 1 year to see if Aaron was right, and to get ready for a still complicated year. Thank you. Have a good day, evening, or what time it is in your place. So that has been a wrap for us in this episode. Thank you so much for watching us. Thank you to our special guests for giving their opinions on what's happening. And don't forget to follow us on our Instagram channels, Facebook channels, follow our DCN Global everywhere. We also have a newsletter which you can subscribe to. And don't forget, we have a monthly Substack newsletter focused specifically on elections, and we will come back with a new episode in June, and we will let you know when we are back. And you can follow us also on how we cover elections on all these channels, but also your opinion is very important to us, so you can send informations about the elections around you on our email address dcnelections@gmail.com. See you soon.